Gambians, especially those living in the Gambia, took inspiration and encouragement from the support and actions of the diaspora. These human rights activists and freedom fighters were the nation's conscience keepers, serving as lodestars and exemplars of home-based activists. Indeed, many online radio stations, online newspapers, WhatsApp and social media, audios, videos, articles emanated from diasporans, and this provided much needed information to Gambians on what was happening. And it also exposed the brutality of the regime of Jammeh and his henchmen. Thanks to these platforms and their riches, many other home-based activists escaped Jammeh's sinister plans against them. Some of you were seen, some diasporans, some of you were seen on social media demonstrating in front of our foreign embassies, waving placards and denouncing dictatorship, while others provided much needed resources and some even paid with their lives. To that we say a big thank you to all of you who mustered the courage to do so. Gambia could not have been liberated from the jaws of dictatorship without your efforts, and you were and are still the champions of our human rights. And by the way, when I say those placards, in front of embassies, we have one standing here. Within few weeks of Jammeh being spirited away into exile to Equatorial Guinea and the subsequent swearing-in of President Barrow into office in January 2017, many diasporans who were in self-imposed exile for fear of being victimized and even killed by the regime of Jammeh returned home. The diasporians continue to support the development of the country, and many of them contributed and are still contributing to the transitional justice process, the ongoing TJ process of the country. For instance, some judges, members of the judiciary, commissioners of the TRRC, you will be surprised, the chairperson, the council and senior staff of the TRRC even. Look at the lead counsel, the deputy, the chief investigator, even the executive secretary, Dr. Yahya Jammeh. They're all diasporans who returned home. And most of them, of course, left this country either because of self-imposed exile. And the chief mastermind of our TJ architecture, Honorable Abubakar Tambidu, was also one such returnee. I am sure that most of you in this hall know of diasporans who have returned home after the defeat of Jammeh to give back to Mother Gambia. I myself was one of them, and many others. In a bid to restore democracy, good governance, respect for human rights, and the rule of law, the coalition government of President Adama Barrow in 2017 embarked on a transitional justice process to address the human rights violations and abuses of the Jammeh regime, and in order to avoid the recurrence of the violations and to consolidate the newfound democracy. So consequently, in December 2017, the government passed a series of legislation to set up the TRRC, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparation Commission, and also a permanent National Human Rights Commission, as well as the Jammeh Commission, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps just 1 minute to explain to you the TJ processes. There's a lot of talk about TJ processes, but these are usually employed by governments, mainly after a conflict. That is a civil war, and in some cases where there is a regime change in a country, but that the earlier regime's rule was characterized by gross human rights violation, which was the case in the Gambia. And there are 4 pillars of the TJ processes. And the great jurist, Louis Jonet, the French jurist, who defined them and subsequently also substantiated by, validated by the UN, that these 4 pillars are: 1, truth-seeking, which was the TRRC; the right to justice, that is prosecution; establishing reparations for victims; and guaranteeing non-repetition in a reform future. That is to say, institutional reforms, setting up of oversight institutions that were not present, or if they were present, to reform them, like judicial reform, security sector reform, civil service reform, and also setting up of new institutions like the NHRC, anti-corruption, among others. Now, the National Human Rights Commission is among those TJ processes. It's one of those TJ laws that were set up in 2017 and is modeled under the UN Paris Principles. That is, setting up of a minimum standards and criteria of having a broad human rights mandate which is independent, credible, and pluralistic in its composition. And this was passed in 2017, and the National Human Rights Commission became operational in 2019, February, after the swearing in of the 5 commissioners. And the NHRC has a very broad mandate to promote and protect human rights, which includes monitoring, receiving, investigating, and considering complaints of human rights violation. It has quasi-judicial powers and has the powers, rights, and privileges vested in the High Court at trial. It can recommend appropriate remedial action to the government. It seeks appropriate redress on behalf of victims. It conducts public awareness and education programs to promote a culture of human rights in the Gambia. It also assists the government in the formulation of appropriate laws and policies to guarantee human rights. And it also ensures that government is in conformity and in compliance with its human rights obligation. So these are the very broad mandate that was given to the National Human Rights Commission through the 3J processes under the National Human Rights Commission Act. But we are talking here and looking at the TRRC, which, as you all know, was launched in October 2018, and it started its hearing on 7th January 2019, and it ended its public hearings on May 2021. It submitted its report to the President on the 25th of November 2021 with 427 findings and 218 recommendations. The TRRC, in its report, touched on various aspects of human rights, with recommendations on criminal prosecution for human rights violations and abuses. It talked about reparation, reconciliation, institutional reform, amnesty, memorialization, and it also mentioned the role of the National Human Rights Commission in monitoring of the recommendation, the implementation. The National Human Rights Commission has been given the role to monitor the implementation of the recommendations of the TRRC and to also submit an annual report to the National Assembly on the status of implementation. Just to inform you that we have done so, there is a report that was submitted to the National Assembly on the status of the implementation. In other words, what has the government done? It is the National Human Rights Commission that is the body that is supposed to monitor the implementation and report to the National Assembly and to everybody. We have done so, and in the course of our discussion, I will perhaps highlight on where we are with the status of those recommendations, but we also have the special advisor to the Minister of Justice, Ida Person, who will, I'm sure, also elaborate on that. I think I have said much, but I just would want to say that there is a lot that the diaspora can do and should do, not only in trying to cement human rights in this country, to make sure that there is rule of law, accountability is respected, protected, and fulfilled by the government, but we believe that the diasporans can work very closely with institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission. We have a 5-year strategic plan with strategic objectives. We believe that an engagement could start with sharing with you the strategic plan of the National Human Rights Commission so that we can start engaging each other. But just to tell you that apart from the broad mandate that we have as a National Human Rights Commission with our key 4 strategic objectives, we have focus areas that we are going to work in 2024, and that's mainly is business and human rights, corruption and human rights, climate change and human rights, sexual and reproductive health and human rights, social protection, and combating hate speech. And we believe that these are key areas that the diaspora can also, that we can work together with the diasporas. Of course, like all institutions and budding institutions, there are challenges that we have, especially in the area of inadequate funding for our programs and our activities. But that notwithstanding, we believe that the diasporans and development partners, their investment and working with us in the area of human rights can guarantee a Gambia where every individual enjoys their fundamental human rights and freedoms, bring back a culture of human rights in the country, bring back accountability on duty bearers and well-informed and responsible citizens, that we will therefore also have an active citizen participation and inclusion in public affairs and governance, that we will have an increased respect for human rights and the rule of law by not only law enforcement agencies, but also Gambians. Human rights is not only horizontal, but it goes both ways. It's vertical and horizontal. We have duty bearers, we have right holders. But you'll be also surprised that we ourselves, sometimes as citizens, are also the abusers of human rights. And the National Human Rights Commission has conducted studies in areas in the Upper River region, among the Sarahule communities, and also in the North Bank, where we found that we have caste discrimination among these communities. So these are things that, as a country, we can work together and combat. The Commission's vision, the National Human Rights Commission vision, is a Gambia where everyone will enjoy their fundamental human rights and freedoms. There cannot be any relevant partner to realize this vision than the diaspora. In our partnership, we can have a better society, one we can all proudly call our home. And I thank you for listening to me in these introductory remarks, and I'm sure I will dilate on some of these issues some more. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Chairman, for very comprehensive overview of the subject. I think you've touched on, you've really set the tone for the discussion, and you have also given us the genesis of where we came from and where we're heading to. And I would, before really starting our discussion, I think it's fit and proper to introduce the panelists. Once again, to my right is Ida Person. Ida Person is a legal practitioner and a TJ expert who has a wealth of experience working in the UN system, particularly playing a very important role in the Gambian media process from its conception and when TRC is being set up all the way to, from the start of the TRC, she was very, very instrumental in the process. And today she wears the hat of advisor to the Minister of Justice on TJ, and rightly so, because she really understands the context and environment. So today she'll sit here and give us the perspective of, I hope, the government, and also in light of her expertise and experience in the Gambian TJ process. And then we have Madam Yadikon, who's a gender activist, a suicide activist whose household name, who currently chairs Tango. And then you have Priscilla Cisse, who's co-founder of WAVE, which is a victim-led organization that supports victims in the Gambia and the TGA process. And to the far right, we have Coach Samba Jao, who's a very well-known renowned activist who's been really fighting for Gambians. He's a right graduate in the United States who's been fighting against dictatorship for a good part of the last 15 years and today. And of course, to my left, Emmanuel Diouf is the chair of the Human Rights Commission, who needs no introduction. I will throw, Gambia went through a very difficult process, 23 years of dictatorship. We all know what happened. Breakdown of rule of law, serious abuses of human rights. In 2016, Gambians came and voted for change. And part of post-2016, we agreed as a country to set a path for a Gambia that is based on human rights, respect for human rights, democracy, and good governance. And one of the things we did was to set up a truth commission, amongst other things, to take stock of what happened in those 22 years, as it, like my friend said, establish the RRC. So we had a truth-seeking process that went back and asked questions of what happened. We had different testimonies, and that truth-seeking process culminated into a report that was made by the commission, edited by the executive, and then we had a white paper. The Gambian truth-seeking process is acknowledged as one of the best in the world. It was consultative, participatory, inclusive, and is now the gold standard of truth-seeking processes. From the appointment of the commissioners, independence of the commissioners in doing their work, and importantly also, government overwhelmingly accepted the most, if not with the exception of one or two recommendations, were accepted by the government. Now we have done with the truth seeking. Now, what do we do with the recommendations? Right? I would now ask Priscilla to give her perspective. One of the important features of this truth-seeking process was that it was victim-centric. The victims had a role in it, from its conception all the way to the end. Victims have always played a role in this. As someone who's been very active in ensuring that victims are empowered and have a say in our TGA process, I'd like to hear Priscilla's views on where are we with, or what is the victim's perspective as far as the implementation of this TRC recommendation goes. Priscilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Saad. Good afternoon all. I stand and address this protocol. As introduced, my name is Yahya Jammeh. And in response to the question about victims' perspectives on the TRRC, or the post-TRRC process, and the recommendations that emanated from the TRRC and the government's white paper and its stance. I believe, and the general consensus is that there is wide acceptance of acknowledgement of the efforts being made up to this present point, even though there are some disappointments because some people do not really see the pace moving as fast as they would want to. And in that respect, I guess there's need for much more engagement with the victims' community so that they'll be able to understand it from that perspective. Even though there is a white paper, there's an implementation plan, but then there are delays, there's resource issues over resource mobilization, and the buy-in is there. Of course, the government is well on board. Not just the Ministry of Justice, who's been playing a key role in ensuring that the different stages and the different recommendations have been implemented and as outlined in the white paper, but as well to see that other stakeholders in the government, they also play their part. And I believe if that is done, that would ease, definitely, it would ease the implementation process, the bottlenecks which are in place in some way or the other, and also help the victims themselves to see it from that perspective, that it's not just the responsibility and focus, it's not just on one stakeholder, not just on one government institution, but that others are taking their part and taking steps to ensure that the recommendations of the TRC are implemented as also outlined in the government's white paper and the implementation plan. So in short, as you all know, that the recommendations, particularly which were much more promulgated and widespread than I think the white paper, has been widely accepted and welcomed. But now it's a case of what next, and where do we stand, and how do we get this moving? Because that is what victims want to know. And a lot of victims are happy that, maybe I shouldn't go ahead of myself, but just to talk about the plans vis-a-vis accountability mechanisms and those measures in place. But then a lot of victims as well are a bit concerned that the pace for reparations is slow. Reparations as they understand it, in terms of monetary reparations, even though reparations comes in different forms. But I'll stop here for now because I believe some of the issues would cover through your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Thank you.
Now, I will, Priscilla has said that there's a consensus that the TRC recommendations were widely welcomed and received in the Gambia. And now, as a representative of civil society, CAGO is basically the umbrella association of civil society. And the truth-seeking process was a multi-stakeholder approach, and civil society played a very important role along the way. Now that we're moving from truth-seeking to accountability, justice, and the quest for reparation, what is the position of civil society vis-a-vis that process? What does civil society think about the process? Where are we going? Are we going in the right direction?
Thank you, Mr. Dow. Thank you, everybody. So, civil society, through the leadership of CAGO, is ready to complement the efforts of government in the implementation, the popularization, and monitoring of the TRC recommendations. Priscilla has talked about the buy-in. So, civil society, we have many civil society organizations that are working with, like you said, it was a joint effort, and many civil society organizations are working on the TRRC process, the transitional justice process. The recommendations of the TRRC has brought out a lot, and like she said, it's a process, it's taking long. We are losing some of the victims. We have lost quite a few, so we are hoping things will move faster. But in the meantime, civil society is taking part in the making sure that government, so we're talking with government, make sure that these things take place.
Thank you very much, Chair of Panel. Round of applause. Coach, my cutoff. Now, as highlighted by Emmanuel, it is the diaspora. You are now speaking for the diaspora. The diaspora really took a very principled stance against injustice and impunity, consistently. Now, fast forward, we have ushered in democracy, a nascent democracy. The government has put in place a truth-seeking material process, which includes a truth-seeking process and TRRC, established Human Rights Commission to instill a culture of human rights. And now we are moving from truth-seeking to justice and accountability. The truth-seeking process was very much seen as transparent because it was basically broadcast across all media. So I'm sure the diaspora were very much, they were following the process because it was all on the radio, on the internet, on the television. Now in terms of, and you're also aware that the government accepted overwhelming recommendations of the TRRC through its white paper and has also now issued an implementation plan. What, in terms of the position of the diaspora, how do you see the process? Is it in line with your expectations?
Absolutely not. I am Pastor Mbajau. Good evening. And before I start, since I'm here from the diaspora, I would want to acknowledge one of our very own who passed away recently, Mr. Matthew K. Jallo, a man who pretty much started the documentation of Jammeh's brutality. So just wanted to express my condolences to his family and everybody, and wish that his soul will rest in peace. To the question. Political expediency has overtaken what we all fought for. As my co-host Musa Jang would put it, the aspirational aspect of our struggle has been betrayed. Yes, the TRRC recommendations were accepted in the white paper overwhelmingly, but that was to be expected. Accepting the recommendation and acting on them are two different things. And from everything that we've seen, the most ridiculous crimes were committed against Gambians. The APRC is just like any party in Germany now claiming to be democratic and associating yourself with the Nazis. Maybe that's a stretch, but that is our reality. Any implementation of the recommendation would require some type of legislation. Who sits as Speaker of the National Assembly today? The man who organized a protest in this country and said that the TRRC report belongs in the dustbin. Appointed by whom? A president whose presidency was made possible by the victimization of the Gambians. Who is his number two? The guy who stood in front of the whole nation, the whole world, and told us that Jammeh's attempt to overthrow the will of the Gambian people was the right thing to do, that Jammeh was not going anywhere. Yes, to answer your question, President Adama Barrow and his government have no political will to ensure justice for the victims whose victimization make his presidency a reality.
Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Coach, for your perspective on this issue. Now, this Ida Person, you're on the hot seat. Ida Person is the TJ advisor. Obviously, you're not a politician, so I want to understand your constraints in that regard. But I mean, from Mr. Jau's intervention, the glass is not half full, it's half empty, right? Now, from the perspective of the government, can you, let me just say, one of the things Mr. Jau said was, there's one thing accepting recommendation, it's another thing acting on recommendation. Can you tell us what steps have been taken in terms of acting on, of course, acting is a process, a conscious process. Where are we in terms of implementing those recommendations of PTRs?
Thank you very much. Greet everybody here, acknowledge in particular if there are any victims in the room and their families. I'd also like to thank the panelists, and you say I'm on the hot seat, but I don't feel that way. I really think that we're all on the same team. We're all on Team Gambia. And it's always fantastic. It's great to hear the perspective of different communities. I think it's only in that way, through dialogue, that we can forge ahead, clearly about a matter that means so much to all of us, the Gambia. I was going to, I think, speak first, and then the moderator, being as kind as he is, has switched it up so that I would be able to not only give information, share what the government has been doing so far, but also have opportunity to perhaps respond. But nonetheless, what I was going to say was that the TRRC process, as you so eloquently described it, Chairman Juf and Salio, was really incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I think it's important for Gambians to take a moment to just sit in that moment. It's also an opportunity for me to ask all the very able, capable researchers in the room to please further study what happened in the Gambia's TRRC process and whole TJ process. It's actually exceptional that the government did decide to accept to implement all the recommendations. In most places in the world, TRRC recommendations don't get accepted by governments. So this is also another very incredible aspect of the Gambia's TRRC process. But here we are. We have accepted to implement. You said 218 recommendations, Mr. Juf, but I've actually counted 263 recommendations. Now for us that are programmers, I used to be a legal practitioner, to implement 263 recommendations in a program is massive. For every single recommendation, it's considered an output area, which must be broken down into several activities. There are thousands of activities that must be implemented in order to be able to fully implement all the TRRC recommendations. And that's what the implementation plan is. It's available, it's accessible, It's on the Ministry of Justice's website, moj.gm/downloads, where we can all read the implementation plan, which takes all the TRC recommendations and translates them into activities with budget lines, with timelines, with who's going to implement it and so on. And it's very important that we had this plan in place because it's really our guidance. It's really how we translate our vision of implementing the recommendations into reality. We all have to work together on implementing the implementation plan itself. So what has the government done in terms of implementing the implementation plan? I think the first place to start is coordination. And Priscilla, you mentioned this, that implementing the recommendations is an all of, not just government, but an all of society approach that must be taken. Because there's so many of them, so many issues. Resources will always be a problem. We have to find ways to be collaborative and innovative. It really is a whole of society approach that must be taken. And on coordination alone, there are 4 coordinating mechanisms that are either in place or soon to be in place that would support implementation of the recommendations. You have an interministerial coordination mechanism, the steering committee. We have a victim town hall. I believe the first town hall meeting held just about a month ago. We have a CSO platform, which again has held and will continue to hold. And then finally, there's a partnership platform that also will be supported to conduct its meetings. I don't mean to maybe bore some of you, but what I'm saying is that when we have so many recommendations to implement, it's important to have a plan, and it's important that the government does first and foremost proper coordination. And I think a lot of effort has been put in place in making sure that the coordination mechanisms are in place and start doing their works. There are 4 different coordination mechanisms: interministerial, one with victims, one with CSOs, and one with partners. Now, in terms of the specific recommendations, I completely agree. Another thing about the TRRC that was very special is the pace at which it ran. It ran at lightning speed. And I remember, Mr. Juf, you once complaining about this, to say that, the TRRC is getting all the limelight and the NHRC is getting none. And that's what TRRCs do, truth commissions, They're very popular, they're always in the media, they tend to operate quickly, in the case of the Gambia, in lightning speed, I would say. But the flip side of that is that not other mechanisms don't operate in the same way. Unfortunately, they can't, just by nature of what they're trying to do and what they are. So the security sector reform process, for example, is just by nature slow. Constitutional review, we see what it is. It's technical, certainly, but it's highly political as well. So it runs at a different pace. I was just going to say that we have to bear in mind that when we're talking about TJ, we're talking about several different processes, and it's sometimes unfair to attribute the pace of one process, comparing it to the pace of another, because they're just different creatures. But reparations, I agree, cannot wait. Unfortunately, we do have victims that are in dire need of medical support and need reparations. And on that front, I'm happy to announce, and I'm sure many of you already know, that the reparations bill has passed. I believe the President has assented to that, which will establish a commission with the mandate to give reparations. I think that is incredible. And very much thanks not only to the work of the government, but certainly civil society and the victim-led organizations, and I think they should be acknowledged for their contributions to making sure that this milestone has been hit. What is the government doing now to make sure that the Reparations Commission is up and running, operationalized, and it actually has the resources, the funding available? There's quite a lot that is being done, and we continue to want to work with civil society and victims particularly to make sure that you're really leading on this process. And in terms of resources, as always, we look internally, we look at the diaspora, we look at Gambians, but we also look at partners to see how they could also fund this reparations program. But it's an aspect that really cannot wait, and we take note of it. I think there's so many things that could be responded to. Maybe the final one I just touch on is on justice and accountability. I like to pair the two because justice is broad and accountability broader. Prosecutions is an interesting area for most Gambians. A survey revealed that the majority of Gambians, when you say accountability, think of prosecutions. That's not the same in many different societies. But on prosecutions, since it's so popular in the Gambia, together again with civil society, victim organizations, there is draft legislation in place that is looking at the prosecution of those people that committed the most serious crimes. We have to admit that there are lots of legislative capacity issues that we have to overcome, but we're getting there. There is work being done. There's legislation in place. There's discussions with ECOWAS, as you're aware, on establishing a special tribunal that will look at the most serious crimes. And of course, our Chief Justice, the Honorable Asanjalo, has gone ahead and established a special criminal division of the High Court, which will be looking at post-TRC cases as well, but those that can be prosecuted and adjudicated in our domestic legislation. So there's also quite some movement on that. I think the point I'm really trying to get at here is that it's not possible on a panel to really talk about all the different achievements and steps that have been taken. I think if I'm going to leave any impression today, is to say that this is a huge task. It has very many different components which run at very different speeds. What's important is that we all see ourselves in the process and the approach that we take to it. For government, I think since the beginning has had a very open and participatory, inclusive approach, and that will certainly continue in implementation. I think I'll stop there, and I think also it's an opportunity really for questions to come from the floor for us to also discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. I must also inform you that Ida was, you became advisor, you have not even been there for a month, have you?
2 weeks.
So really, you can see that she's already up to speed, and I think she's been highlighting some of the steps taken by the government in terms of setting up the reparation committee, and also kickstarting the accountability and justice process, which also, even though moderators, I'd just like to say that the Bar Association actually have been working very closely with the Minister of Justice, to support the Minister of Justice and the government to draft 2 bills. These bills are to provide a legal framework to ensure accountability. So as we speak now, we have a SPO bill, which is Special Prosecution Office, an independent prosecution office, which is a recommended TRC. The bill has been drafted with support from the U.S. government, Bar Association, working together with the Minister of Justice, drafted by Ben Suda, and that has now, I understand, received cabinet approval. We also have a special accountability mechanism bill, which is basically a framework that will establish a hybrid court that will try international crimes, and also we have a local, there's also a special criminal court that has already been created by the Chief Justice. So in terms of criminal accountability, for Bar Association, I can assure you that things are moving. It may not be moving as fast as expected because the TRC process doesn't expect the same pace, but there is some movement in that area. And now, the TRC Act, after the end of the truth-seeking process, gave exclusive mandate to monitor implementation to the NHRC. So NHRC has set up a mechanism, a multi-stakeholder mechanism that includes the victims, the Bar Association, civil society, technology, and different actors to monitor how far we are with implementation of the RSA. And they also have a duty to report to the National Assembly. So, Mr. Diouf, what steps have been taken so far in terms of discharging the mandate? And can you also give us some highlights?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Some 18 months ago, I felt the same way as Pastor Mbajau coach. I was a doubting Thomas, although I was the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, and for the same reasons. Especially, this was even before the report came out, and somebody mentioned that it's tissue paper. You know, you had a process going on, you had victims, and you kind of water down all that effort into a tissue paper. But we have moved ahead, really. Then came the government white paper. This is what we were waiting for, all of us. The government white paper came, and yes, it accepted most of the recommendation in varying degrees. But of course, accepting, as was rightly said, is not enough. We are talking about implementation. So the fact that the National Human Rights Commission was not only mentioned by the TRRC as the body that they felt would be the independent body that can effectively monitor, the government also accepted that in the white paper. Now to come to your question, what have we done since? We, in fact, even before the government's white paper came out, if you remember, we started conferences on one was accelerating the implementation of the white paper. We even had another big conference on TRRC implementation, what next? But quickly, once we were given the mandate, one of the things that we did was to set up a multi-stakeholders committee to report on the implementation. So in other words, since we were now given the powers to monitor and report back, we developed a multi-stakeholders committee. If you look at the TRRC recommendations, there are 16 thematic areas. I think 17, the 17 volumes was a photo. But the 16 thematic areas, soldiers with a different, prosecution, religious attack on religious freedoms, April 10 and 11. So on each of those areas, there are recommendations. So as a body, now we have a monitoring system. Just to tell you that we have even right now developed an online monitoring tool. In the next 1 month or two, from the confines of your offices, you will be able to click and see what the government is doing, what the advisor is, all what the advisors are telling you. Where is the government with the setting up of the prosecution office? What have they done? What are the challenges? So this is what we are monitoring. The government came up with an implementation plan in May of 2023. And as the body monitoring, we now have their implementation plan. And it is this implementation plan that we are monitoring to tell you that, well, they have not done this, they have done this, but also we have an advisory role in the process to tell them and flag and said, you said you were going to do this, you have not done that. But just to maybe inform you that the first report of the status of implementation of the TRRC, we have it. I even have it electronically. I can share with you. But you will discover that this was early days. This report came out in July of last year. This was just 1 year after the TRRC. And you will discover that here, we even told you that the government had only fully implemented 6. The 165 of those recommendations were ongoing for implementation. Sometimes you will not be fully implemented, but the fact that they have set up or they're setting up a prosecution unit tell us that, well, they're in the process. Also, we've discovered that 91 were not implemented. But so what we do as a monitoring body is to make sure that everybody is aware that the government also knows we will have a dashboard to tell everybody, Gambians, that this government is not doing what it's supposed to do. And remember, we report to the National Assembly, and it is the duty of the National Assembly to take the government to task and tell them, all, you are not doing what you said you were going to do. But fast forward, things have happened. We have been pushing for, the TRRC has talked about banning of certain people holding public offices. We, as a monitoring body, we went around and we discovered that those people who were banned were even in government, they're still working. And we raised this issue. For example, when this issue was raised, the government even came up now with an act called the banning of public officers. So that now it's in place. So we have our checklist, and these people who are named now are actually being told to leave these offices. Just to tell you that the process is slow, but certain things are being done. Then we have the reparation bill, which you've just mentioned. The office, the special prosecution unit, and the bill on peace and reconciliation, it's also out there. So we are monitoring, and as I said, our monitoring will even go online, so that what we are doing is we're making sure that the government, we all know, if you leave things to government are politicians. But the fact that an independent institution has been given the mandate to monitor, we owe it to the Gambian population, to everybody, diaspora, taxpayers, to tell you what the government is doing with the TRRC. You see, the thing is, we need to be serious about the TRRC. The never again mantra cannot have any meaning if we are not serious. And this is why, and I hope the likes of Coach, you will still be there with your checklist, because there was a reason why we got to where we came from, 22 years. And this is why, in my introductory speech, I talked about the importance of a TJ process. And I mentioned 4 pillars. The truth-seeking, which we have done. We're in the process of prosecuting those who bear the greatest responsibility. Then we talk about reparation. But there is one pillar which most of the time is the reason why TJ processes fail. I was invited to go to Tunisia and talk about TJ processes, and I discovered they failed in one area, and that is institutional reform. What does that mean? And Pasamba also mentioned those things. What happens with TJ process? With time, people forget. And you will be very surprised that anti-democratic forces can easily re-emerge and gang up if you do not reform those systems. For example, we know that we have a failed judiciary. We talked about mercenary judges. This happened in this country. You could not get justice. So you cannot have an effective TJ process if we do not address that. I think we all in the Gambia today say that we have a functioning independent judiciary. But it doesn't stop there. Those that were found wanting most of the time were our security services. You look at the TJ, the TRRC, if you watch the TV, who were the perpetrators? The police, the military. We need to reform. Otherwise, they never again. They will do exactly, what they were doing before. So institutional reform is key. You must have independent institutions like the NHRC that are independent, credible, are not intimidated, that they can speak the truth. This is important as well. And anti-corruption. So we should concentrate on institutional reform if the never again is going to be meaningful. Thank you, Mr. Saab.
Thank you. I will give you for the speakers 2 minutes. I'll start with Ida.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Juf, maybe just to highlight to you that in the implementation plan, outcome 19.14, you could mark that off because it says include discussions on the role of diaspora in the TJ process as part of the annual diaspora dialogues. And I believe this has been convened by the Office of the President in partnership with GK. Please do update. I'm sure we've done much better than 6 recommendations being implemented. But I do agree with what you said about institutional reforms being important. And it goes back to initially what I was saying about our TJ process being so broad, and that is why it's so applaudable. That we do still have an ongoing security sector reform process, a constitutional reform process, in addition to implementing the TRRC recommendations. I think what I would want to wrap up with in 2 minutes is to say there is an implementation plan, there is a coordinating unit, there are different layers of coordination that are happening, and implementation is actually happening. We take note, though, that communication needs to be improved, and we're working on that. But really, there is quite a lot of effort being done. And if you look at the entire matrix, there's really a role for every aspect of society to contribute. For the diaspora that is here, I think the point has really been labored on how you can support. In fact, I hope it's not even dissuading. But I nonetheless would like to repeat a few things. One of which is technical assistance. And really, the MSDG project is a huge programmatic opportunity to leverage on technical assistance. I'm thinking technical assistance on program management, because our TJ process is legalistic, it's on reparations, it's on different issues, but it's also a program. And I'm finding that perhaps we need more support in program management. We do need some more support on communications as well. In terms of the legal sector, the capacity gaps are also there. If we're trying to try international crimes, we need experts on international criminal law. And in special technical areas like in forensics, for example, or investigating enforced disappearances. So the conversation will continue on the technical assistance that's required. We look forward really to the contributions or leveraging on the existence of MSDG. I also wanted to say research is a very important one. We're just coming out of a workshop that discusses how research is so important for development in the Gambia. And so research of, like I said, what has happened in the Gambia to be able to uproot a dictatorship, research into the best practices that we can receive from the TRRC, but research as we continue to implement these recommendations so that they're really informed by the best evidence out of there, and that the recommendation implementation isn't just a checkbox exercise. And I think just to leave it on a softer note, advocacy and support. I really hope that the diaspora and all
Ida just ticked a recommendation just now. So we'll continue on that. The CSO transitional process as well, we are on it. So I think these are some of the highlights of the work we are doing. Continue pushing and engagement as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ida and I must have been comparing notes, she really touched on a number of issues I wanted to talk about. But I just want to add as well that, as has been said before, the role of the diaspora has been really commendable in terms of the whole trajectory, the start, the continue now at this point, and it's definitely going to be needed for the continuation. In this respect, I would also want to encourage network building, especially with local civil society networks, so that in this area we could also have issues relating to capacity building, for example, supporting measures that would contribute to justice and accountability. That's really important, and it is lacking. And when we have resource mobilization and support that contributes to resource mobilization, that also would help in just easing the burden and the pain of measures that would speak to reparations, especially financial reparations for some of the victims, as well as memorialization initiatives. Whilst we're waiting for the government to do its part, there could be a lot that together collectively with the Alliance of Victim-Led Organizations, with different victim-led organizations, we can continue to work in that area. I just also want to highlight and commend the role of the diaspora in terms of contributing in policy development. That needs to continue as much as we can. And one important area as well is the stage of universal jurisdiction. Definitely, because whilst a number of alleged perpetrators are in some jurisdictions, it's those who are in the diaspora that are able to point them out to authorities in those countries, and in that way, the process starts, looking into the alleged crimes and human rights violations. So definitely, the role of the diaspora in universal jurisdiction processes is huge. And as we have seen in all the cases that have been started in different countries, and most recently with Ousmane Sonko in Switzerland, again, with the support of international organizations, but it's members of the diaspora that has played a part in that. So we need to recognize and encourage that to continue. Also to say that as we're working together, we could put in our resources as much or as little as they would definitely go a long way and would help in addressing the needs of victims in so many different ways, more than what the local resource would be able to generate. So it's a case of thanking the role that the diaspora has played, the role that individuals and communities and groups and families of victims themselves have played, and putting themselves wide out there, leaving themselves open to some of them re-traumatization because they're sharing their stories and their experiences. And also just recognizing that, as been said, it takes a whole nation to heal a few who some think is just a few that was affected. But if you go through the onion layer peeling, you'll realize that the nation as a whole and the fabric of society was disrupted. So it takes how do they say it? It takes a community to raise a child, yeah, a village to raise a child. And herein, we would call on everyone to continue what they've been doing and to do it better and best, so that we can really go through a process of knowing that never again is never again, never again, and that the victims who have been impacted, they get some redress from all that they have encountered. And on this note, I'd like to thank everyone who's played a part, one way or the other, in supporting the victims community in the Gambia. Thank you.
Yes, I'm not a contrarian by any stretch. I just try to be a realist. As you were getting excited about the Victims Reparation Bill, the ban from public office bill, I was. Until I saw, during the same period, former president's bill. Yahya Jammeh with all the crimes that he is accused of committing in this country, is entitled to his full retirement. There is no law, regardless of what the minister was trying to sell people, no law, not in that act, not in the Constitution, not in the Criminal Procedure Code, no law that would stop Yahya Jammeh from receiving a penny from the bill that was just passed by the National Assembly, which I believe that body is the biggest enabler of maladministration in this country. And while I was looking at that, you see, what the government is doing is giving with one hand and taking with the other. Because when they passed the Commission of Inquiry Amendment Bill, giving the president the powers to pardon those who've been found liable by a commission, what they did in essence was make a mockery of victims and the very essence of that provision in the Constitution. So, like, I am not naive. I want to believe that something is being done. But whilst you are doing something, the politicians are doing something absolutely different in the interest not of justice, but political expediency. It is also an irrefutable fact that almost all the laws that made dictatorship possible for 22 years in this country are still evidently present in our books today. So when you're talking about the implementation of the TRRC recommendations, it must start with ensuring that laws that are fettered to democracy should not be part of our books. We talk about human rights and the diaspora. Section 39 of the Constitution gives every Gambian of age the right to vote and sometimes to be elected into office. In the 50s, there was a group of Gambians who came and created an organization called the People's Protectorate Society, which later became the People's Protectorate Party in 1959 and changed to People's Progressive Party. And the essence of it was to ensure that all Gambians, especially those who were in the provinces and were disenfranchised, had the right to vote in the 21st century. 2024, a Gambian in the diaspora has no right to vote unless you pay thousands of dollars to come here and be registered. If you happen to acquire a second citizenship, you cannot run for office, not for president, not for National Assembly. And their excuse is patriotism. Many of those who held those flags that they are talking about today, in sub-degree weathers, in the United States and in Europe, held or hold a second passport. The reason why today we are talking about 737 million remittances are from those that they claim are not patriotic enough to be ministers. Most Gambians in the diaspora, not me, cannot be advisors, cannot be ministers, which is an advisory position. But the president does not have a problem appointing some of these people as advisors, some of whom are very comfortable with their American passports to say that, you know what, let me just stick with being an advisor. So the essence of democracy and human rights is that no Gambian should be discriminated against based on political expediency. The very essence of this fight was for democracy, full democracy, for everybody, irrespective of where you live or your political affiliation. Unless we have that, like Musa Jeng would say, the aspirational aspect of our fight for Gambia will continue to be betrayed. With that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In 2016, yes, I'll wrap up. I think this is very important, and we decided to change. And I think the fact that we're in this hall and we're entertaining divergent and even very critical views is testimony the fact that change has happened and is happening. I think we should acknowledge that fact. I think one thing we should remember, when we got together to fight dictatorship, we looked at one purpose. We wanted to salvage Gambia's future, present and future. We came together and fought that. I think in terms of consolidating and being a democracy, we'll have differences. That's what happens in democracy. We have differences. But let us also remember that when it comes to ensuring that the TJ process succeeds, that impunity is not acceptable in this country, we, all Gambians of all postulations, must always come together. We don't have differences as we do this, but our common goal is to ensure that we build an inclusive, participatory democracy where every Gambian sees themselves in the process. And even divergent and dissenting views are respected and welcome. I think, Mr. Coach, I think we need people like you to keep everybody on their toes. I think also for the government, I think the government should do better in terms of communicating what they're doing and also take note of what's coming from the other side. Well, it's in one side. I think it's one side. But sometimes when you're inside, you don't see it, you see it differently. I think this kinds of fora is very important so that we reflect and see where we're going and how we can be better. But I believe that the glass is half full. Can we be better? Yes. Can we be quicker? Yes. But the only way we can do it is if we work together. Thank you very much. And I would really take this opportunity to thank YSK and partners for doing this. I think it's 7 years, right? 7 years consistently having this forum, bringing diaspora Gambians from all walks of life to have very, very meaningful discussions on how to move this country forward. Mr. Fall and team and partners and sponsors, we are very, very grateful. Thank you very much.
Are we dismissed?
Yes.
We dismissed ourselves.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Later you should give me my necktie so you don't trash it in the